Welcome everyone to this webinar brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Habitchonistim. IDSF is a movement of reserve officers and operators from all branches of the Israel Defense Establishment who believe that strong national security priorities and staunch Zionism are necessary for Israel to be the eternal homeland of the Jewish people. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into these war briefings. It is very important to us at IDSF that we can share with you war updates and analysis about this war here in Israel, and that we can connect our experts with you in these very direct and candid briefings. We are joined today by Fleuhr Hassam-Nahoum, Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem and Israel's Special Envoy for Innovation, and Danny Seaman, former Director of the Israel Government Press Office. Thank you both so much for joining us today. General Avivi is not able to join us for this briefing, but will be back with us on Monday at 10 a.m. There was really a tragic terrorist attack in Jerusalem this morning. Fleur, are you able to share with us what happened and what the current state is right now?
So unfortunately, this area, this Trampiada, we call it, it's essentially a bus stop, which is just at the exit of the city, has been the focus of numerous attacks now. There's something about this place that makes it apparently very easy or is very vulnerable for terrorist attacks. So two gunmen, two terrorists, basically one with an M16 and one with a pistol, just started shooting at innocent people standing and sitting at this bus stop. Unfortunately, 3 people are dead, a 64-year-old, a 72-year-old, and a 24-year-old woman. 5 people are very, very badly injured. We don't know if they're all going to make it out. Part of them have been in surgery. And the 2 terrorists were neutralized on the spot, actually, by a reservist who was on his way back to Gaza. So this poor guy who's about to go into a war zone finds himself in this bus stop killing 2 terrorists who've opened fire against innocent people. And what we subsequently learned about these terrorists is that they are from Jerusalem, homegrown, right here, from Subacher, which is known as a breeding ground for Hamas. And it's about 1 kilometer away from where Danny and I live. And we've known that this is a hot spot for radicalization, for radicals. One of them spent 10 years in jail, and they both apparently identify with Hamas. So this is what's happening to us in the middle of a ceasefire. So-called.
So has Hamas taken responsibility for this? How do these people connect with Hamas? They're in Jerusalem, Hamas is in Gaza. How does that connection happen?
I find it hard to believe that Hamas is busy right now. So I find it hard to believe that they activated this type of thing. It was probably lone wolves inspired by Hamas, or with a local Hamas chapter, or with a Hamas chapter emanating from Judea and Samaria. I don't think it's coming out from orders from Qatar or Gaza. I think they're busy with their own, annihilation attempts. So I would tend to think that it's just 2 guys who are part of some local Hamas chapter and who decided maybe with local leadership to do this.
Are you able to elaborate a little bit on what that means, that there's this hot spot of terrorism in Jerusalem and what is being done about it?
So basically, for the most part, to give people context, Jerusalem is the largest city in the country. So the whole country is about almost 10 million people. Jerusalem is 1 million people. We're also the most diverse city in the country. What do I mean by that? In the whole country, there's 20% Arab population, and Jerusalem is 40%. 40%. In the whole country, it's about 15% Haredi, 14% Haredi. In the city, it's about 30%. So we really have the 2 largest minorities living in the largest numbers. But let's look at the Arabs for a second. Most Arabs are living and working side by side with Israelis here in Jerusalem. And more than that, in the last 10 years, there's been a marked difference in the attitudes of Arabs in East Jerusalem. None of them have become Zionists, but many of them have realized that the salvation is not coming from the Palestinian leadership. Boker Tov, as we say here. It's not coming from the Palestinian leadership. And therefore, they've decided to take advantage of the bridges that we've been trying to build, of the opportunities that the city leadership gives them. And we see more and more Arabs in universities, in Israeli universities and colleges. We see more and more Arabs in, in public spaces, same places that Jews used to go to. More than 10 years ago, the life is very segregated. It's not like that anymore. In the city of Jerusalem that employs 11,000 people, there's a big proportion that are Arab workers. And like I say, we work side by side. And most people just want to live normal lives. But within all of that, we have a major problem. And this is something that I blame ourselves for. And that is that 85% of the school-age kids in East Jerusalem are learning the same educational curriculum that they're teaching in Gaza. Think about this. The same curriculum of UNRWA that UNRWA has accepted is the Palestinian Authority curriculum, accepted by UNRWA, which is paid for by the entire world, but also present in the city of Jerusalem in 85% of the schools. In the last 5 years, we've tried to incentivize East Jerusalem schools to leave the Palestinian curriculum and to adopt the Israeli curriculum, which is the Israeli curriculum for Arabs, which means they learn Arabic as a first language and Hebrew as a second language. And we've moved the needle from 92% that were learning the Palestinian curriculum to 85%. But it's not good enough because the Palestinian Authority curriculum teaches hatred, glorifies martyrs, that's their big role models, tells children, is obsessed with the right of return, which means that there's no two-state solution here. It's all about everybody will return and all the Jews will be thrown to the sea. They're very specific. Israel doesn't exist in any of their maps. We talk about Tel Aviv, Haifa doesn't exist. And basically dehumanizes Jews. And even in the most banal things like math questions, the questions are all about conflict and all about war with Israel. So if in the first intifada you killed 10 Jews and in the second intifada you killed 30 Jews, how many Jews were killed in both intifadas? These are the math questions, okay? Now, I went around the world when I found this out, when I became deputy mayor. I've been a city councillor for 7.5 years, but I'm only deputy mayor for 5. And when I found out, I thought, oh my God, who's funding this? And I went all around the world. I went to the House of Lords in London. I went to the State Department in America. And I said, I said, don't stop funding UNRWA, but at least fund it on condition that they change their curriculum to one of peace, which, by the way, was an Oslo Accord commitment, okay? And when I got back, I realized that the biggest funders in East Jerusalem of that curriculum is us, the Israeli Ministry of Education that pays for the salaries of these teachers and that is essentially paying 80% of the curriculum of 85% of these schools that are teaching their children to hate us. And I mean, there are people who've been fighting this for years, like David Badin, like people from the Palestinian Media Watch, lots of people, and Impact SC have done so many reports on this. I'm not the only person talking about this. And every time we get close to trying to change something in Israel, somehow the security services get involved and say, no, don't touch it, don't touch it. So I decided that I wanted to lobby the Knesset to make a law that Israel cannot fund anything. I mean, it would seem obvious and intuitive, right? Israel can't fund anything that that teaches kids how to hate us and kill us, and Israel doesn't have a right to exist. And I mean, and there are committees now in the Knesset talking about it. I don't know how close it is. MK Amit Halevi took over from me. I'm not a member of Knesset. I'm in the city hall. And he's taken over, and I don't know how much advancement, but this is something that if one small thing should come out of this horrible nightmare we're living through, is zero tolerance to funding or allowing anybody else to fund a curriculum of hatred, because we kick the can down the road and look what happens. The kids now, we left Gaza in 2005, and the 18-year-olds that have never lived under Israeli occupation in Gaza still hate us and think we're the worst thing in the world. So I think that everybody, including UNRWA, the UN, the countries that support UNRWA, but in East Jerusalem, only in East Jerusalem, it is also funded by the Ministry of Education.
Wow. I mean, if that's how they're being educated, there's no hope. In terms of the Arabs living in East Jerusalem, can you just please clarify for us?
Yeah.
They're Palestinians, they're Israeli citizens with the Teudat Zehut, and if they're Israeli citizens with the Teudat Zehut, can they be in a school that is run by the Palestinian Authority? How does that work?
So that's a good question, Moshe. And I think there's a lot of confusion about what the status is of the different types of Palestinians. So I want to make some order. So you've got the Arab Israelis who are citizens, full citizens, 20% of the country, heads of banks, judges. We are not a racist country. We are an inclusive country. They in their schools, they have Arabic as a first language, Hebrew as a second language. Most of them want to live in peace side by side, and most of them would never want to be part of any type of Palestinian future state or any type of autonomy for the Palestinians. That's the Arab Israelis, full citizens and passport like all the rest of us. Okay. Then you have the Jerusalem Arabs. Some people call them Jews and Palestinians. I call them Jews and Arabs because many of them don't want to be called Palestinians. So the Jerusalem Arabs that live in East Jerusalem before 1967, okay, between 48 and 67, were living under a Jordanian illegal occupation that came out of the 1948 war that, of course, we didn't start. We never start any wars. After 1967, many of them actually had Jordanian citizenship at that point. And in 1967, Israel annexed the East and West Jerusalem. We reunified our holy eternal capital. And all those Arabs were given the option to become Israeli citizens, full-on Israeli citizens. Only 10% of them exercised that right. 90% of them remained Jerusalem residents. Now, what do Jerusalem residents don't get, that Israeli citizens get? Nothing except one thing. They cannot vote in national elections. So Jerusalem Arabs who are residents, and that's about 85–90% of them are residents and not citizens, can have everything except vote in a national election. Okay? Now, they can get healthcare in the city. I've given birth, thank God, 4 times, always shared a room with an Arab woman, always, in Shaarei Tzedek. They get an educational system paid for, which we are allowing them to choose their own curriculum under this umbrella of independent school system. It's called the Mukar Lelo Rishmi. It's called the non-official but recognized school system. And through that loophole, they get us to pay 80% of the school expenses whilst teaching a curriculum that they teach to hate us. They have everything that Israelis have. They can vote in a municipal election. They choose not to because, in fact, they are intimidated by the Palestinian leadership not to. The only thing they can't do is vote in national elections because they're not citizens, they're residents, okay? But in the last 10 years, yes, somebody's asking, do they pay taxes? Absolutely. They pay taxes, they pay city taxes, and I mean, I'll talk about a few things. Because of the Second Intifada, some of those villages are actually beyond the separation fence. And we have a lot of problems actually providing services or even controlling what goes on beyond the separation fence. Because it's, you know, it's a big wall that we put up there for our own defense during the Second Intifada, so we wouldn't get blown up in cafes. Because we knew that the Judea and Samaria Palestinians were coming in through the Jerusalem border. and there was no border. And so we put up a fence. The problem is that 2 areas over that fence are still in municipal Jerusalem. We have a lot of problems over there. And there's gangs and criminals, and don't even ask. And we don't even really have a true number of how many Palestinians are there, because what happens is that many of them from the Judea and Samaria come and seep in and marry the ones that are there and get Jerusalem residency. It's chaos over there. And so that's the situation. So they are not citizens, they are residents. The third category of Palestinians are the Palestinians who are not citizens and who are not residents and who live under the Palestinian Authority. 94% of Palestinians are ruled by the Palestinian Authority. Now, the problem with that is the Palestinian Authority do not rule very well. They're just busy stealing everybody's money and buying themselves private jets and building themselves castles and sending their children on luxury trips around the world. And as a result of that, they really don't have proper governance. And that's why 150,000 of them have work permits to come into Israel every day, go through the checkpoint, which is essentially was supposed to be a border in a Palestinian state that they didn't really get their act together to create. And they come into the border through the checkpoints every day to work in Israel because their government gives them zero opportunity to anything. So like I said, 3 categories. And of course, the Gaza Palestinians are really the same as the West Bank, Judea and Samaria Palestinians. They're living under their own authority. They're Palestinians. So those are the 3 categories.
That's very helpful. Very helpful. Thank you. And I think
Ask
that was
me
a great Arab-Palestinian status 101 for our viewers. I want to bring Danny in for a second. Danny, you're also in Jerusalem. And on these briefings for many weeks now, we've been discussing the war in Gaza, what could happen up north with Hezbollah, Iran, Yemen. So my question, Danny, for you is, given what happened this morning in Jerusalem, do we think there's a real chance that things can erupt within the Arab population, within Israel, the Palestinian population, within Jerusalem, and that's going to be another front potentially of this war? What are your thoughts on that, Danny?
It's already a front where there are already daily incidents occurring, and it's been going on like that for months now. Only the focus has shifted from Judea and Samaria, from Jenin, from Tulkarem, from Shechem, Ramallah at times, shifted to Gaza and to the north. But now we're operating there with a greater degree, not only of urgency, but if previously we were reluctant to use full force, and in many occasions even endangered the lives of our own troops. Right now, they are using things that we haven't used since the Oslo War, as they called it, the Intifada back 20 years ago. And they're using aircraft and unmanned aircraft and taking out, just yesterday, they took out the commander of the Jenin refugee camp, was a member of the PLO, by the way, and took out, he was operating the camp. And there's really no difference between Hamas and the PLO. And Jibril Rajoub himself, who's a ranking member of the PLO, said it himself, that they are very supportive of what happened on the 7th of October, and they would support it, and they would do it if they could. So it's ongoing. It's ongoing, and this has been a situation for a long time, because the PLO not only cannot control the area, they don't want to, and they want this to happen. The whole concept right now is to have Israel bleeding and engaged in a war of attrition, to go on for as long as possible, to weaken us economically, to weaken our resolve. All I can say is that's not going to happen, because the Israeli public today, after the 7th of October, is in a totally different mindset. We realize what needs to be done, and I saw the questions that were asked here. Don't worry, even if the government is weakened, and it's not, just so there's no misunderstanding, the public here will not let that happen. And today, Henry Kissinger passed away. He was one of the fixtures in the American State Department for a very long time. and people know how he was. It's just symbolic that the fact that he would go out of the picture now, because it doesn't matter who runs the state of Israel. The population of the state of Israel are fed up. Population of Israel have had enough. The population of Israel are no longer willing to live under conditions and the circumstances under which we've lived for over the past 20 some years since Oslo. Some of the questions here are asking, how could we let all these things happen in Jerusalem, the education system? Our failure on the October 7th was not only the military. The military was an extension of what has been going on here. Failure upon failure in many different ways with the concept. I hate that word, but this concept that if we just keen to them, if we just work, if we try to find some kind of resolution, things will work out. A majority of the public here understand that that's not the way, and they will no longer tolerate any politicians in Israel not understanding this. Luckily, our politicians are very good in the sense that they realize what the public want, and they're not going to back off of this. So we're going to be taking out Hamas. The one thing we're trying not to have is a three-front war, not to mention a two-front war. And there's also the possibility of even an external four-front war, which includes Iran. I don't want to say a lot about that, but you can see things are happening. Just remind people that exactly 20 some years ago, there was an invasion of Iraq, of Kuwait. It took the United States, it took Britain, it took France, it took the Western world several months to prepare to take out Iraq and Saddam Hussein. So things don't happen overnight. The 7th of October was a very important date. I think a wake-up call for many people around the world, not only here in Israel. We're the ones on the forefront at the moment, but there are other things that have to be dealt with. And so that's why Israel also has more room for maneuverability. So the situation in Judea and Samaria is being taken care of. There has to be more awakening with what is happening in Jerusalem. Fleur was very right. Jerusalem is a whole different thing because there are a lot of points of contact between Jews and Arabs. A lot of the Arabs, they can't say it openly, but they much prefer. Just the fact that Fleur mentioned that, before I forget, Fleur, somebody asked, how can they contact you and how can they follow you?
Just put my handles on. I'm
I haven't seen
active
that.
on
Good.
social media, so you can follow me.
Excellent. So Fleur said very correctly that there are pressures on those citizens who want to live with us here. Now, it doesn't mean that they love us. And anybody who lives in Jerusalem knows that we may not love each other, but we get along. And that's maybe a very important thing. Now, I'm not using that as an excuse to say, oh, yeah, let's all sing Kumbaya, my Lord, and live together in harmony. No, we're very aware of the situation here. So these things happen. It's part of the life in Jerusalem, but we were going to be taking out those elements. And right now, the concentration of the government is on Hamas, but they will be eliminating all those threats. The state of Israel will always have to deal with the Islamic, and I stress Islamic elements in Arab society that will not accept our presence here, but we can make it very not good for them to follow through on this. And that's what we'll be doing now. And it's going to take a while. These things it took a long time to get to this kind of situation by some of the many mistakes that we did here on Israel, and it will take time to correct those mistakes.
Thank you so much, Danny. We're going to switch gears for a moment because Fleur, you were the first Israeli official, I hope this is correct, to land in the UAE once the Abraham Accords were signed. So my question to you is, are the Abraham Accords helping at all during this war in Gaza?
So that's a good question. And I think we have to answer it in a few ways. So first of all, just to give people context, I'm the co-founder of the UAE Israel Business Council and the Gulf Israel Women's Forum. I'm a Sephardi Jew who believes that fundamentally we can have, Jews and Muslims can have peace, but that political Islam has basically ruined everything. And I'm not the only person to think that way. There's a lot of people that I know in the UAE who believe political Islam is the worst thing to happen to Muslims. And when I arrived there it was actually ironically Erev Simchat Torah 2020, it was just at the beginning, we started having meetings with people and I realized that they really wanted peace with us. They were very curious about Jews, curious about our customs and our traditions. And over the last few years, I've built some very deep friendships. So let me put some context. The Abraham Accords are not dead, okay? Not only are they not dead, The Arab League met 2 weeks ago with the purpose of boycotting Israel, and they couldn't get the resolution through because 11 countries, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, refused to condemn Israel. Now, did they condemn Hamas? Probably not. The Bahrainis condemned the massacre. The Emiratis condemned the massacre. Even Saudi journalists have been condemning Hamas. They hate Hamas more than we do. The UAE kicked out the Muslim Brotherhood 10 years ago from their country. Bahrain almost had a coup that Saudis had to put tanks into Manama, into Bahrain, to kick them out. They know who Hamas are. They hate the ideology. They are moderate Arab countries that want peace and prosperity for the region. And the region is split into two. The countries that want peace and prosperity, and the countries that want destruction and Islamic fundamentalism, led by Iran. Now, why was Saudi willing to make peace with Israel? Not because they care about Israel or they really care about the Palestinians. None of these Arab countries do. It's because they wanted a mutual defense pact, a defense pact with the US. That's what Saudi wanted. And why did Saudi want a defense pact with the US? Because of Iran. Now, if you ask me what we should be doing, is preparing to get rid of the regime in Iran, and not Israel, all of the Western free world, because they are as much of a threat to them as they are to us. We're only the first stop on the tour of creating a worldwide caliphate. And the world has not woken up to the fact that if you get rid of the head of the snake, you get rid of all the, the head of the octopus, you get rid of the tentacles. Because Iran has, we in Israel, I think that the policy has been a little bit skewed. We've been very worried about their nuclear capacity, and we've ignored the fact that Iran is already in Gaza. They're in the north with Hezbollah. They've ruined Lebanon. They've taken over Syria. They're in Iraq. They're in Afghanistan. They're in Yemen. They're in Qatar. And they're in Turkey. Iran has been busy, and they're doing very well. And meanwhile, everybody's asleep, trying to make a pact with them just to push off their nuclear capabilities for 5 years. Wake up. The world has to wake up, and we have to actually work towards regime change in Iran. And you know who wants this more than anybody? The Iranians. We need to be helping them in their own revolution and not throw them under the bus the way that two already American administrations have thrown them under a bus. And so I am optimistic. I think President Herzog was supposed to be today in the climate conference, which I had 2 events planned for the climate conference in Dubai. But of course, that's all gone. But I am cautiously optimistic that when, please God, we get over this war, that things will carry on ticking. Trade this year is going to get to $3 billion between Israel and the UAE. That's unprecedented. It's going well in Bahrain. And so we can, and Saudi will make peace with Israel. And I'll even say something controversial, maybe in this audience. I believe that post-Hamas Gaza, that the Abraham Accords countries have a role to play. I really believe it. If something practical can come out of the Abraham Accords in the short term, I would rather see UAE and Saudi Arabia and Bahrain in Gaza than the useless idiots of the UN.
Fleur, Hassam-Nahoum, thank you so much for joining us. I have to say, of a week of war briefings, it's amazing to end with that optimism. So thank you so much. Fascinating to hear everything you had to share. Danny Seaman, of course, amazing perspective as well. I will remind all of our viewers that these briefings are recorded, and you can, of course, check them out as we send them in our newsletter. And I would encourage all of our viewers to share this briefing widely with your family and your friends. I think everyone needs to hear what was said over the past 30 minutes. So thank you both for joining us. Thank you to all of the viewers. Stay safe, stay strong, everyone. Take care.
Amen.